our lecturer today, Joel Mowdy, who teaches an English course to Mykolas Romeris University bachelor students who specialize in English for specific purposes and also translation studies. So Joel will talk today on how to be creative and will give us some lessons learned in creative writing. But before we start, let me ask him some questions. So, Joel, could you tell us a bit about your background? Where are you from and how did you grow up?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Joel Mowdy, and I grew up in New York, on Long Island, New York. I'm the fourth child out of 12 in my family. And so, I mean, I grew up in this huge family, and which had really cool benefits to it, which was that I always had a set of friends around me, but I also kind of had this experience that not a lot of people have these days, where in my family, I often found lots of times where I could be neglected in a very good way, where people would not pay attention to me if I was quiet. And I found this as a great way to just explore my own mind as a kid. So, and I could switch back and forth between having, jumping into this huge family of friends, and spending time with them, to disappearing into my own world. And I think that kind of is the root of my love of being creative and being a creator, because I find that it's a very individual experience, and that's where I always kind of felt myself as a kind of an artist in that sense, until I got to school, which is another story. But so anyway, I grew up on Long Island with this huge family, and I did terribly in school, for the reason that I'll tell you why. So I was as a child, like I said, I love to have this time to explore and to be in my own mind, and just wonder about the world. And then I suddenly had to go to school, and I didn't like that I was being kind of, told you have to go here, and now you have to do this, and now you have to do this other thing. And so I didn't really take well to it. I had a very difficult first bunch of years at school, and then I had a very difficult middle school years. And then I went to high school, and I got kicked out of high school 2 times, and I had to go to a special high school for bad kids. Are you surprised to learn all this, Liudmila?
Really?
You hired me.
Okay.
But that was my growing up experience. So it was really, really big, loving family, but also a struggle, like a propensity to be creative. And I was a slow learner as well. I had to do special reading classes as a kid. And it's not because I not intelligent. It's because as a child, I was not interested in reading. I was not interested in going, listening to what my teachers had to teach me. Later I was, when I decided I wanted to go to university, which was, again, another struggle in my life, because I'd done really terribly all through school. I was a poor student, because I was a little bit rebellious, and I didn't want people to tell me what to do. And second, because I wanted just blanket freedom. I wanted freedom to explore and to just do things my own way. But what was the second part of your question?
Okay, and how did you become a writer then?
Okay,
why did you choose this path?
Is very much connected. This is very much connected to that story, because as a kid, I was also very interested. Like I said, I think I had a very wild imagination. I think a lot of kids have a very wild imagination. Pretty much all of us do. Super imaginative creatures who wonder about things. And I think what happens often when we go to school is that creativity and wonder gets kind of drilled out of us. And we could blame teachers for it, but I don't think, and I used to blame teachers for it all the time. But later on, I became a teacher, and I realized that it's really not the teacher's fault. Oftentimes, it's the systems in which the teacher is working. And teachers are under a lot of pressure, and that pressure goes down into the students, and the students are pressured. And then as they go up through the years in school, they're expected to conform more and more and more to a standard that does not necessarily allow for creativity. There are right answers, and you're expected to know them and to be able to repeat them, and to and that's how you are successful in life. That's the story you're told. So I wasn't really buying into that story as a student, because I remember being very, very young. Let's see, I'm maybe in 4th grade, and I had a writing assignment, and I wrote a story. In my mind, I wrote the story of this great adventure these two friends have. But on paper, this story was very incomplete, because I didn't have time to finish it, because I was mostly just fascinated up here in my head, wondering and getting excited about it. And it wasn't translating, it wasn't coming out on the page the way I imagined, but I didn't know that it wasn't. I was just excited. The moment for me was great. And then I got this paperback with a poor grade on it. It was my first bad grade on a creative piece that I've done. And from that point on, I was just continuously discouraged and discouraged and discouraged. I was also very interested in art and drawing before I went to school. And I had the same experience in my art classes, where I was told, you're doing that wrong, you're doing this wrong, your perspective is off, and all of these things that all I was hearing is that you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I rebelled against that, not by saying, no, I'm right, I'm going to do things my way. I did it by misbehaving. So by the time I graduated, I was like, great, I'm done. I'm out of this place, and I'm going to do things my own way. But I was completely lost, because in the real world, you can't just, exist. You have to make a living. You have to do things. So I spent 3 years just kind of wandering around and working really poor paying jobs, and just kind of getting by and wondering what I was going to do. And eventually, and I'll tell you the story during my presentation a little bit, because it fits better in there, but eventually I ended up going to community college, and I took a writing class, and I got some encouragement. And at that first moment of encouragement, I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. And so from that moment, I said, I'm going to write a book. This was more than 20 years ago now. I'm going to write a book. That's my goal. And that kind of drove me the rest of the way through university, and in some ways, what made me become a teacher in the end.
So thank you very much. So I know that our students really love the way you teach, and I hope that you will share now with us on how to be creative, and what you have learned in that creative writing, right? So you're most welcome to share your presentation.
Okay. So I hinted at some stories, and you'll hear more about them through the presentation for sure, because they're really an integral part of my journey to becoming a creative person, a creative writer. So I'm just going to get this opened up here. Okay. So now I consider myself a creative person, but I'm not super skilled at PowerPoint. But we're going to see what happens when I do this. I try to keep it simple. Let's see how it works. So
yeah, it's fine.
My presentation is how to be creative, 6 lessons learned in creative writing. I'm going to just jump right into it. And my first point that I have to make about how to be creative, it's very simple, super simple to follow. And that is to say yes. Just say yes. We say no to things when we have an idea. In my experience, when we have an idea to do something creative, that the default is often to say no. And that's because that's out of fear. We're afraid to say yes to being creative because we're afraid of failure. And one thing I learned, and this is going to be, my stories are going to be told not in a very chronological order to explain this, but when I started going to community college, remember I started going, I did poorly in high school, and I decided, okay, I'm going to make a go of this. And I went to community college, and there were some things I was really deathly afraid of. I was afraid to show any part of myself, especially afraid of public speaking. And public speaking is a very creative act in a lot of ways. It's a performance, and I was so afraid of it that it really made me scared. It made get my heart going, the idea that I would have to get up and speak publicly. But the thing was that I realized at that moment, and this is connected to an experience I had earlier, I'll tell you about, but I realized in that moment that if I'm so afraid, it's probably because there's something at stake for me. There's something big at stake for me. And if I fail, the thinking goes that if I fail at this, then I will be a failure, and that will define who I am, that I'm a failure. But it's not really what's happening. The fear is that the fear is telling you that really, if you go through this fear, you will become something different. You're going to kind of go into be something new by going through it. So the bigger the fear for me meant that the bigger the reward. So if I was afraid of doing something, then my default would have to be to say yes to it, and just bear it, to say yes to it, face the scary thing. But sometimes now, practically, it doesn't always work out. So let's say you have an idea. Let's say you want to be a writer. You grew up reading fantasy series, and you want to write fantasy novels. And you get this idea. You've been thinking about it. You have a character. You have a plot. You have all of these great things happening in your head, and you say, "That's it. I'm going to write a fantasy series. I'm going to write 3 books." But no, that's scary. I don't even know how to start. That's a big undertaking. I can't do that. Do you say yes? Well, you can say yes, but yes, but yes, but coffee first sometimes. That's me every day. But sometimes it's yes, but maybe I don't have to take on such a huge undertaking at first. Maybe I could, for example, just write a story about my protagonist, maybe how she discovers her powers. I could, do something small that would be complete. That's a step in the direction of this bigger goal that I have, this bigger creative goal. So I call that like the yes, but rule. And I also do this as a teacher. I do this with students. Oftentimes, I taught high school for quite a bit, and my students would often, for an assignment, a writing assignment, or any other kind of creative assignment, a presentation, I had one rule in my choices of things students could do. You could do this essay, you could do this thing, you could do this third thing, and you could tell me your idea that you want to do. And my caveat was always, I will say yes, but it might be yes, but. So yes, but it has to fit this particular rule that we have in the classroom. So I find that this idea of saying yes, but having the caveat of like, maybe we need to alter it a little bit so that it fits. It's a helpful way to conquer the fear of failure, to conquer the fear of facing a huge creative challenge. So that's the first rule for me. To just take that first step in that direction, say yes, and then figure out how you're going to proceed, even if it's just a small step in the direction. Okay, that's the first lesson in how to be creative. You have to say yes.
Okay, yes.
You have to get over that. You have to get over that first jump. Sometimes I had a friend who said one time, good ideas are cheap. but it's the hard work that's doing it. And the hard work begins with saying yes to it, opening the document, putting a title on it, writing a sentence, and then hitting save, and you've started. Taking the clay out, molding it on the table, putting it out there, getting your supplies out. That's kind of another small way of saying yes, just to prepare yourself to do it, to do the work. Okay, the second really important thing, and this is kind of where my story really begins, is to tune out the critics, to quiet them. And this comes from, so I was telling you before about how I finished high school and I went out into the world and I didn't know what to do. I was kind of stuck. So one of the places I went to, I had a dream. I was going to go west. I was going to pack up my stuff and go west. And I thought about this dream for like 2 years. And then I was invited to take a room in an apartment in Queens, New York. So I was out on Long Island, and Queens, New York was west of me, not very far west, but that's a step in that direction. So I went, okay, I'm going to go to Queens, New York. And I took a job in Manhattan, working in a corporate kitchen 2 days a week, making just enough money to pay my rent and really nothing else, rent and some food. So I had no money. I was in the big city and I couldn't go out. So it was hard for me to even make any friends and meet people. So what I ended up doing with my 5 days a week of not working is I bought some paper and I bought some pens and I bought some drawing supplies. And I said, I'm going to go back. I'm going to start drawing again like I did when I was a kid. And I started drawing these pictures. And as I was drawing, I kept erasing things. I kept erasing what I was doing. And this is my very first attempt to draw after a long time. And I have one page and it's just full of eraser marks and full of those little eraser beads that you get on your page and pencil smears. And I asked myself after a whole day of this and feeling frustrated, and I said, what am I doing? Why am I not letting myself do this? And it was because there were voices in my head telling me that I was wrong. And I thought, well, who's telling me that I'm wrong? What's going on here? And I sat there and there was nobody else there. I'm sitting in my apartment by myself for many hours and I was bored. And this is why I got into doing this. And boredom is this isn't in my presentation, but I'll tell you now, boredom is a great way to become creative too. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting there bored and I said, okay, I'm going to listen to those voices and hear what they're saying actually, and put them into words. And what that voice was saying. So once I put that voice into words, the words were, you're drawing that line wrong. And I really thought about that. It's like, what does that even mean? How can you draw a line wrong? Who's saying that? That was the second question. So whose voice is that? You know whose voice it was? It was my 7th grade art teacher. Here I was, an adult living on his own in my 20s, listening to my 7th grade art teacher telling me that I was wrong. And the ridiculousness of that situation, the idea that I don't even know if she was alive anymore. She's in my head telling me that I can't do this. And I said, no, you got to get out. You need to leave. So I evicted her. And I started drawing and I made a rule as I was doing it. And I said, I'm not allowed to erase anything. That was my rule. And so through that process, by kicking that person out and saying, okay, you're not allowed in here and I'm not going to let you back in because I'm going to create this rule that doesn't let you come in. And that's where I started to really I felt in that moment, it's a moment I can point to this that I really felt like I was becoming creative again. And that led me to going to college. That moment led me to go to college and to the idea that I'm going to do scary things and I'm going to not listen to the critics that are in my head telling me I can't do it. It could be parents, it could be people that you grew up with. Most of it though is imaginary. Most of it is just imagining what people might think. So tuning that out is an important step to get them quiet and don't let them live in your head without paying the rent. Okay. And that they will stay, if they're in there, they will, every step of the way, they will criticize you because that's what their job is. They're critics. That's what they do. So you have to get rid of them. So the way to get rid of them, again, two things: listen first, write down what they say, and see how ridiculous it is. Identify who it is, and then tell them to leave. It's like an exercise, not exercise in like we're going to do a writing exercise, but like the way priests do. It's an exercise. So you can see how messy my presentation is. We're on rule 3 actually, and it says rule number 2. You can see some of my revision here. I made a mistake, but that's okay. Mistakes are part of the creative process.
Exactly.
So of course, for a presentation, I should have noted that. I'll have to make it a lesson for myself. This is rule number 3. So rule number 3 of mine is to set rules or limits. It almost seems counterintuitive to the last rule, because the last rule says to get rid of the critics, and this rule says, set rules or limits. But the thing here is when you set the rules or limits, when you make a conscious decision to do that, you're already involved in the creative process because you're creating the rules. You're creating them. You're creating them as a way to contain your creativity, right? You're giving form to the thing you're creating. And ultimately, you're fostering creativity this way. Think about the story I just told you about me sitting in my queen's apartment. I made a rule to not erase any lines, and that led to me drawing some really fantastic things that I would have never thought to draw before, in styles that I would have never even considered, because I was trying to be realist like my 7th grade teacher wanted. I was being fantastical. I was making, I don't want to compare myself to Picasso. It was really just me drawing little pictures, but those pictures were important to me, and they were fantastic to me, and they were surprising to me. And that was an important part of that process of my becoming. So those rules or limits that you can set for yourself so that you can contain your creativity. And there are studies done on this too, that say like when you set limits, when you set rules around creativity, you become in some ways more creative. This is why some great artwork comes out of places where there's censorship in place, because censorship is a kind of imposed rule that that you have to kind of work around if you want to get your story. If you want to get some ideas out that are not sanctioned, you have to find creative ways to get to work them into the rules that are there. So my rule of not not erasing lines turned into a rule of not lifting my pencil, and then I had more interesting. I changed my style a little bit and made me try something different. The limitations kind of give form to your creativity. So setting rules or limits. One example of this that worked out really great for people, there's this thing called 6-word memoirs. And you can look into this, you look it up online. I won't go too deep into it, but the idea is that people can write their life story in 6 words. And this is, again, one of those things like say yes, yes, but let's say you wanted to write a story, you wanted to write about yourself, and you can take this 6-word idea. So can I do it in 6 words? That's not a lot. That's a small commitment. It's hard to do, but you can do it. And here are some examples of things that people wrote in their memoirs, the stories of themselves in 6 words. So lost, had to Google myself. And the great thing about this too, you could do this with friends. You can do this in a new setting, and if you have some people do 6-word memoirs, and then you can ask them about it. So what is that? It's okay. You have to tell me about that. That's so interesting. You got lost and had to Google. Got so lost I had to Google myself. What's the story behind that? And so these things could be, these rules or limits can be springboards into creativity, into a deeper dive, if you will. You might paint a landscape with like 3 primary colors. That's your rule. You might maybe make a sculpture out of things that are only found in the recycling bin. You know, that's, you know, make a dinosaur out of whatever you find in your bin. Yeah, those things could be very interesting and can lead to more groundbreaking things for you as a creative person. And then in the end, you know, can you break the rule? Yes, you can. See lesson number 1. You can say yes to breaking the rule too. So it's flexible. It's not a scary thing to do. Okay, my 4th lesson is to impose a deadline. This number is right. I got this number right. See that? 4. So I say set a deadline because especially when you start taking on bigger creative projects, that because if you have a deadline, you will finish. I went to go for my queen's apartment. I was doing all those drawings, one off at a time, really pleased with myself. And I started to feel confident. I said, okay, I'm going to go to college now. And I went to community college, and my interest switched. I'm still interested in drawing, but it really switched to writing because I took a writing test when I was there and I did well. And I got a compliment on my writing from the professor I ended up taking classes with. And at that moment, I decided I was going to be a writer. It's like, here's something I'm good at. I'm going to do this. And in college, you get deadlines. So it's a great place to say, okay, well, I'm taking this class and it's going to make me do this thing. And I will have to complete it because there's a date that says you have to turn it in by this date. And that was really great for me. And I had a great professor when I went to university. From my community college, I went on to a university, and my writing professor there, who became my mentor, he loved my stories, and he would set deadlines for me, of course, because I was in his class. And that was really good to have. The thing with deadlines, though, is they're hard to follow if you're not being held to them. So, you know, I wrote a book eventually. This was my goal when I first wrote that piece that got a compliment. I said, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write a book. That was the thing I said yes to. I said yes, but first I have to write stories. Maybe I have to write one good story. And in the end, that goal took me 20 years to reach. And partly because I didn't always have somebody to hold me to a deadline. In the end, my old professor from university stepped in and he said, hey, remember the stories you used to write? What are you doing with them? And I kind of imposed a deadline to him. I said, oh, I'm working on them. And can I send them to you in a couple of months at the 1st of September? He said, yes, I'll be looking forward to them. So here was an opportunity to set a deadline for myself to finish something creative. So that's the 4th rule for me, in my own experience, is to have a deadline. And then you'll finish your work. You'll finish something. And I know this is about creative writing, but really the process really is for anything. If you think about it, any goal that you're setting for yourself. And that leads me to the fifth goal. This 5th goal is listen to the critics. So this is in complete contradiction to my 2nd rule, my 2nd lesson, because by the time you've created something, you finished it and you put it out in the world, who did you put it out there for? You put it out there for people to enjoy. You put it out there for people to experience and to learn from. And the experiences are all going to be different. They're going to be various. Some people will love it. Some people will love you for it. Some people will be, you know, shocked and surprised in good and bad ways. And some people will not like it at all. And that's fine. But the thing is, you want to listen to all of them. You want to hear what they have to say, because listening to it, if you find somebody who's taking the time to look at your work and to experience the thing you've created, it's worth getting their reaction. It's worth getting their feedback, because it might inform you as an artist as a creator and help you to refine your work and to make it better. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the critics say. Oftentimes, the critic, the one with that sick face all the way to the right of the screen there, that can be really disheartening to see and to hear. And that person might decide to live in your head, you know, just like before, just like the 7th grade art teacher. And you'll have to weed that out. You'll have to identify it and say, well, are they right? No, that's just their opinion, man. And then boot them out to tune them out again, right? So you have to sometimes go back to the second lesson and tune out the critics. Okay, and then finally, my last lesson in my last mini lesson in being creative is to celebrate your milestones. So all the way back in that Queen's apartment when I first started drawing those pictures back in the late 20th century, let's call it. It was in the 1990s. And I was drawing in my little notepad and listening to the critic and trying to get the critic to be quiet, and then kind of having this breakthrough that led me to go into college, that led me to studying writing, that led me to making a small, make me say yes to a small step that would lead to a bigger goal. That all 20 years later, I reached it. 20 years later, I published my book. The very first story that I wrote, the very first, that small step I took, I don't even know how long, maybe it's 9-10 pages, this story. And that story is in my book. That story is in the book that it took me 20 years to write. It's there. It's one of the small steps. But I said yes to it. I said yes. I made a commitment to it. I had a deadline. I followed through. I didn't listen to the critics until the time came, and I listened to somebody I trusted who understood what I was doing. But it's important that you celebrate it. These things, these moments of success, of accomplishment, they're short-lived. You know, the book gets published, the art gets displayed, the people come, they watch, they look at it, and then you're back to a blank page again. It passes, and it doesn't get easier. The critics are still there, right? You have maybe some new ones in your head, and you have to identify those critics, and you have to shut them out, and you have to kind of move on. And the great thing about seeing it as milestones, so a milestone is a marker on the highway. It's an indicator of where you are, and it tells you how far you've come. But it reminds you also that it's a journey. You have to take it a step at a time, and that creativity is a process and not a destination. So doing the work, it's about doing the work, not about completing. Completing is important, but the moment of doing it, the moment of creation is the reason to create. And those are my lessons. That's my process in not a nutshell, but a short presentation. Thank you for listening.
So thank you, Joel, very much for sharing your experience, and it's actually sharing your philosophy, right? Philosophy of how to be creative, and I think that it can be applied, as you mentioned as well, not only to writing, but like any activity that we do in our lives, business, I don't know, but any sphere actually, right? So you should say yes. Well, yes, but do not be too harsh on yourself. So you can set limits like but, and then still be critical, but discard that irrelevant criticism or not constructive criticism and the like. So that really fits into, I think, studies, work life, like anything basically. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
This.
And thank you for letting me share it, because I think as the rules kind of, or not the rules, as the lessons kind of indicate, that it is a process, and you have to always remind yourself of the process, because we sometimes become so goal orientated. We think about the grade we're going to get. We think about the job we'll get for doing all this good work that we're doing. And those are important things. That's why we are working in some ways, is to meet those results. But the process itself has, you know, important things. You want to enjoy the process, and you have to keep all of those things in mind. You have to be reflective, really. And I think that's one word that I didn't have in my presentation that kind of is a thematic one throughout, is to really be reflective. And to, you know, to think about where your ideas are coming from, and where your criticisms are coming from, and to, you know, just relish moments of success, even the small ones.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Liudmila.